a realm dominated by one unstoppable superpower spanning from Greek coastlines to the peaks of India, an empire that had endured for generations, appearing invincible and eternal. Now envision a single individual, a ruler from an obscure kingdom, who would dismantle that colossus in merely 12 years. This warrior would lead his forces across more than 20,000 miles, emerging victorious in every confrontation. He was a strategic mastermind, tutored by Aristotle himself, who declared his own divinity. His soldiers revered him as their champion, while his adversaries saw him as a merciless destroyer. His existence blazed with an intensity unmatched in history, reshaping the world's geography forever. This is the saga of Alexander the Great. Before we trace his path from cradle to grave, we need to grasp why his tale continues to resonate across the ages. Alexander's impact reaches far beyond military victories. He was a revolutionary thinker who sought to merge Eastern and Western civilizations, birthing a fresh Hellenistic world that would reshape art, knowledge, and thought for generations to come. Modern military institutions continue analyzing his strategic methods. His mythical status has motivated leaders from Julius Caesar to Napoleon Bonaparte. Understanding Alexander means understanding the pivot point between antiquity and a new interconnected age, an age born from his relentless drive and the battlefields he conquered. Our tale opens in 356 BCE, within the royal stronghold of Pella. Macedonia was a harsh, mountainous realm on the edge of Greek civilization, dismissed by the refined southern city-states like Athens and Sparta as barely civilized. Yet within this crucible of warriors and political scheming, a prince entered the world who would eventually claim supremacy over all. Ancient tales claim that on his birth night, the magnificent temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 ancient wonders, was consumed by flames. A celestial sign, they said, suggesting the cosmos couldn't support 2 such immense forces simultaneously. His father, Philip II, was the most formidable figure in Greece. Philip was a revolutionary military architect and a calculating political operator. He inherited a fragmented, vulnerable kingdom and forged it into a military juggernaut. He revolutionized the Macedonian forces, extending their spears to forge the unstoppable Sarissa phalanx and mastering combined warfare with his elite cavalry units. Philip harbored limitless ambition, and through conflict and negotiation, he brought nearly all Greek territories under his authority. He was preparing for his ultimate ambition, the assault on the mighty Persian Empire, when his son Alexander reached maturity. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was Philip's 4th bride and a princess from the untamed kingdom of Epirus. She was passionate, brilliant, and intensely spiritual, a follower of mystical practices. She professed descent from the legendary warrior Achilles and allegedly told Alexander that his real father wasn't Philip, but Zeus himself, the king of gods, who had visited her disguised as a serpent. This intoxicating blend of divine and heroic lineage planted in young Alexander an overwhelming sense of purpose, a conviction that he wasn't merely mortal, but chosen by divine forces for extraordinary greatness. Her influence would fuel his ambition throughout his existence. From childhood, Alexander exhibited the traits that would define his destiny. He was intensely competitive, sharp-minded, and possessed a magnetic presence that attracted others. The most celebrated tale from his youth involves an untamed wild stallion called Bucephalus that no experienced horseman could ride. Young Alexander, perhaps only 12, noticed the horse feared its own reflection. He calmly repositioned the animal toward the sunlight, calming it before mounting and riding with perfect control. Philip, watching with tears streaming down his face, proclaimed, "My son, you must seek a kingdom worthy of your stature. Macedonia cannot contain you." The royal palace in Pella was treacherous ground, saturated with envy, betrayal, and bloodshed. The relationship between Philip and Olympias was volatile and frequently hostile. As Philip acquired additional wives, Olympia's standing and Alexander's claim to succession grew increasingly uncertain. This tension exploded during a wedding celebration for Philip's newest bride, where an intoxicated general questioned Alexander's legitimacy. Enraged, Alexander hurled a cup at him. Philip, also drunk, drew his weapon and charged at his own son, only to stumble and collapse. Alexander mockingly observed, "Behold the man preparing to cross from Europe into Asia, yet he cannot even traverse from one couch to another." The incident was humiliating. Fearing for their survival, Alexander and his mother escaped into exile. Though eventually reconciled with Philip, the event left permanent damage. It taught Alexander a brutal reality about power's fragility and betrayal's constant threat. He learned wariness, to trust sparingly, and to respond decisively against perceived threats. This environment of court intrigue forged within him a core of ruthlessness essential for his survival and future conquests. Recognizing his son's exceptional intellect, Philip recruited the greatest mind of the Greek world as his tutor, the philosopher Aristotle. For 3 years at the peaceful temple of the nymphs in Myesa, Alexander and a select group of noble youth, who would become his lifelong companions and future commanders, studied under the master. This wasn't ordinary schooling, it was comprehensive training in what it meant to be an ideal Greek sovereign. Aristotle instructed Alexander in rhetoric, literature, science, medicine, and philosophy. He cultivated in him a profound appreciation for Homer's works, especially the Iliad, which Alexander allegedly kept beneath his pillow for life, viewing the hero Achilles as his ultimate inspiration. Aristotle taught him politics, leadership ethics, and the Greek principle of arete excellence. He also educated him about the world beyond Greece, about the vast Persian Empire, which Aristotle and many Greeks perceived as a decadent, tyrannical civilization deserving conquest. The education at Mieza was profoundly transformative. It provided Alexander the intellectual foundation for his ambition. It ignited his curiosity about the natural world, leading him to bring scholars and historians on his future expeditions to document new territories, flora, and fauna. Most crucially, it reinforced his belief in Greek cultural superiority and the notion that he had a mission to extend its civilizing influence to the barbarian world. This conviction, instilled by Aristotle, would become the philosophical rationale for his conquests. Alexander's education extended beyond academics. His father Philip, the master of warfare, ensured his son received rigorous military training. From youth, Alexander was immersed in Macedonian soldier life. He trained with infantry, learned cavalry riding, and studied the revolutionary tactics Philip had perfected. He witnessed firsthand how the long pikes of the phalanx could contain an enemy while the heavy cavalry, acting as a hammer, could crush their flank. At merely 16, while Philip campaigned elsewhere, Alexander was appointed regent in Macedonia. When a Thracian tribe revolted, Alexander didn't wait for his father. He assembled forces, marched north, brutally suppressed the rebellion, and established a new settlement on the site, naming it Alexandropolis, the first of many. His true trial arrived 2 years later at the decisive Battle of Chaeronea, where Philip's army confronted combined Athenian and Theban forces. At the battle's critical moment, the 18-year-old Alexander led the decisive cavalry charge that shattered enemy lines and secured Philip's dominance over all Greece. These early experiences proved invaluable. They taught Alexander not merely how to fight but how to lead. He earned soldiers' respect by sharing their hardships and fighting in the front ranks. He developed keen battle awareness and an almost instinctive grasp of when and where to deploy forces for maximum effect. He had inherited his father's army, but he was rapidly proving he possessed military genius entirely his own. Alexander marched into Egypt in 332 BCE not as conqueror but as liberator. The Egyptians had long chafed under Persian rule, which they viewed as oppressive and disrespectful to their ancient gods and traditions. They welcomed Alexander with open arms, hailing him as savior and crowning him as the new pharaoh, legitimate heir to ancient dynasties. In Egypt, Alexander made one of his most lasting contributions to civilization. On the Mediterranean coast at the Nile's mouth, he identified a site with natural harbor and perfect strategic location. There he laid out plans for a new city, naming it Alexandria. He envisioned it not just as military outpost but as a great center of trade, learning, and culture, a crossroads where Greek and Egyptian worlds could meet. His vision would become reality as Alexandria grew to become the intellectual and cultural capital of the ancient world. While in Egypt, Alexander embarked on a dangerous journey deep into the Libyan desert to visit the famed oracle of god Amun at Siwa Oasis. The god Amun was seen by Greeks as equivalent to Zeus. What happened in the sanctuary remains mysterious, but when Alexander emerged, the high priest had reportedly greeted him as son of Amun, son of Zeus. For Alexander, this was divine confirmation of what his mother had always told him. It solidified his belief in his own divinity and fueled his ambition to a level beyond any mortal king. In 331 BCE, Alexander marched out of Egypt to face Darius for the third and final time at Gaugamela. Darius had assembled a colossal army on a wide, flat plain perfectly suited for his cavalry and scythed chariots. Vastly outnumbered, Alexander deployed a tactical masterpiece. He advanced at an oblique angle, created defensive flanks in reserve, and devised brilliant counters to scythed chariots. The battle unfolded according to Alexander's design. Persian chariots were neutralized, and his oblique advance created the exact gap he'd predicted in the Persian line. He led his companion cavalry in decisive wedge formation, charging straight for Darius. For the second time, the sight of Alexander in full charge broke the great king's nerve. Darius fled, and his army, seeing their king abandon them once more, collapsed into complete rout. The victory at Gaugamela was absolute. The Persian Empire as military force was finished. Alexander marched his army into the legendary cities of Babylon and Susa, the administrative and economic capitals of the empire. He was welcomed as the new king and took possession of the vast Persian treasury, a fortune so immense it would fund his campaigns for years and fundamentally change the ancient world's economy. From Babylon, Alexander marched to Persepolis, the ceremonial and spiritual heart of the Achaemenid Empire. After allowing his troops to loot the city, he committed one of his life's most controversial acts. During a great victory feast, he ordered the magnificent palace complex of Persian kings, one of the architectural wonders of the world, to be burned to the ground. The motivations behind this act are still debated by historians. Was it a drunken act of impulse, as some ancient sources suggest, or a calculated political act, most likely the latter? The burning of Persepolis was the ultimate symbol that the Achaemenid dynasty was finished. It was the final dramatic act of the Pan-Hellenic revenge war, payback for the burning of Athens by Persian King Xerxes 150 years earlier. Whatever the reason, Persepolis' destruction sent a powerful and irreversible message. It signaled one era's end and another's violent birth. For Persians, it was an act of profound cultural vandalism. For Alexander, it was the final closing of a chapter, freeing him to move beyond a revenge war and begin creating his own new empire. With the empire's heart now in his hands, Alexander began the final phase of his conquest, the pursuit of fugitive King Darius. This was more than just a hunt for one man. It was a high-speed campaign to secure the Persian Empire's vast eastern provinces before they could rally around a new leader. Alexander pushed his men at incredible pace, covering huge distances in relentless pursuit. Darius, now a king in name only, fled eastward, hoping to raise a new army in the provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana. But his authority had evaporated. His own noblemen and satraps, led by a man named Bessus, saw him as failure and obstacle. They betrayed him, placing him in chains and continuing flight. When Alexander's pursuing forces finally closed in, Bessus and his co-conspirators stabbed Darius and left him dying on the roadside. Alexander and his men arrived to find the once mighty king of kings bleeding to death. Alexander was reportedly moved by the sight, covering the body with his own cloak. He sent Darius's body back to be buried with full royal honors and declared he would hunt down and punish the king's slayers. This was shrewd political maneuvering, positioning himself not as foreign conqueror but as legitimate successor to Darius, now tasked with avenging his death. With Darius dead, Bessus declared himself the new great king. Alexander marched his army into the remote and rugged eastern provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana, a land of harsh mountains and fierce warrior tribes. Here he faced a new and difficult kind of war. Instead of set-piece battles, he was confronted with a brutal 3-year guerrilla campaign of ambushes, raids, and popular uprisings led by local warlords like Spitamenes. It was in these remote lands that Alexander, now 30 years old, met and fell in love with Roxana, the beautiful daughter of a local Sogdian nobleman. Their marriage was genuine love match but also brilliant political move. By marrying a local princess, Alexander signaled his intention to rule not as Macedonian conqueror but as king of both East and West. The marriage helped pacify the region and build alliances with local nobility, demonstrating his vision of a fused multicultural empire. The campaigns in Bactria and Sogdiana were brutal slogs that tested Alexander and his army to their limits. They revealed the immense difficulty of governing such vast and culturally diverse territory. Alexander responded by founding numerous new cities, also named Alexandria, to act as military garrisons and centers of Greek culture, hoping to control and civilize surrounding regions. The long, difficult campaigns in the east began taking toll on Macedonian army morale. Alexander's adoption of Persian customs, such as wearing Persian dress and demanding prostration, angered many of his traditionalist Macedonian officers. This simmering discontent erupted in 330 BCE with discovery of conspiracy against his life. A commander named Philotas, son of Alexander's most trusted and senior general Parmenion, was accused of knowing about the plot and failing to report it. Under torture, Philotas confessed and implicated his father. Alexander, increasingly paranoid and intolerant of dissent, had Philotas and other conspirators executed. But he knew he couldn't leave the powerful and popular general Parmenion alive, even though there was no evidence he was involved. He sent assassins back to where Parmenion was governing and had the old general, the man who had served his father and himself so faithfully, murdered without trial. Parmenion's execution was a dark turning point. It was cold political murder that shocked the army and stained Alexander's reputation. It demonstrated a new level of ruthlessness and paranoia in his leadership. The charismatic king who once inspired unwavering loyalty was now beginning to rule through fear, and bonds of trust between him and his Macedonian veterans were beginning to fray. With the East seemingly pacified, Alexander's insatiable ambition drove him onwards to a land of myth and legend, India. In 327 BCE, he led his army on one of history's most remarkable military feats, crossing the formidable Hindu Kush mountain range into the Indus Valley. Here he faced new terrain, debilitating climate, and fierce kingdoms that refused to submit. His greatest challenge in India came at the Hydaspes River, where he faced King Porus, a giant of a man commanding a powerful army. The centerpiece of Porus's force was a terrifying corps of 200 war elephants. Alexander, faced with determined enemy on opposite side of swollen river, once again displayed his tactical genius. He used series of feints and daring nighttime crossing during thunderstorm to get portion of his army across, surprising the enemy. The ensuing battle was one of the bloodiest and hardest fought of Alexander's career. The Macedonian phalanx had never faced war elephants before. The massive beasts crashed into their lines, creating havoc. But Alexander's men, disciplined and adaptable, targeted elephant handlers and flanked the terrified animals, eventually causing them to run amok through their own lines. After brutal struggle, Porus was defeated. Alexander, so impressed by his opponent's courage, treated him with honor and allowed him to continue ruling his kingdom as ally. After victory at Hydaspes, Alexander wanted to march further to the great river Ganges and the ends of the world, but his army had finally reached its limit. They had been marching and fighting for over 8 years, thousands of miles from their homes. They were exhausted, homesick, and weary of their king's endless ambition. At the Hyphasis River, the men refused to go any further. It was mutiny. Alexander was furious. He secluded himself in his tent for 3 days, trying to shame his men into changing their minds, but they wouldn't budge. Finally, he relented. In emotional speech, he praised their achievements but agreed to turn back. It was the only time his army had ever defied him and the only time his ambition had ever been checked. The mutiny at Ephesus was a profound turning point. It marked the practical end of Alexander's eastward expansion. The dream of conquering the entire known world had collided with reality of human endurance. The journey back would prove as deadly as any battle he'd ever fought. To return to his empire's heart, Alexander made a fateful decision. He split his forces, sending part of his army back by sea while he led the main contingent on march through the brutal, uncharted Gedrosian desert. The march was catastrophe. The army was assailed by blistering heat, flash floods, and complete lack of food and water. Thousands of soldiers, along with their families who followed the camp, perished from thirst, starvation, and heat stroke. It was the greatest disaster of Alexander's career. Why did he do it? Was it reckless strategic mistake, or did he see it as necessary challenge to rival mythical journeys of heroes? Whatever the reason, it was testament to his incredible leadership that he held the starving army together. He refused any special treatment, famously pouring a helmet full of precious water into sand in front of his men, declaring he wouldn't drink if they couldn't. Alexander survived the desert, but the ordeal had profound impact. It shattered the health of many veterans and further strained his relationship with his men. He had led them to the ends of the earth and back, but the price in suffering had been immense. Alexander spent his life's final years back in his empire's heart, focusing on administration and consolidation. He worked tirelessly to organize his vast new territory, establishing common currency, building roads, and encouraging trade. He was no longer just general, he was architect of new world order. His most ambitious and controversial policy was his attempt to fuse Greek and Persian cultures. He adopted elements of Persian dress and court ceremony and encouraged his soldiers and officers to do the same. He incorporated tens of thousands of trained Persian soldiers into Macedonian army ranks, treating them as equals. The ultimate expression of this policy came at grand ceremony in Susa, where Alexander himself married a daughter of Darius and compelled 80 of his senior officers to marry daughters of Persian noblemen in mass wedding. For traditional Macedonians, these policies were outrage. For Alexander, they were essential foundation of new, stable, multicultural Hellenistic empire, ruled not by Macedonians over Persians, but by new unified ruling class. In 324 BCE, Alexander suffered devastating personal blow. His closest friend, his lifelong companion, and his most trusted general Hephaestion suddenly fell ill and died. Alexander was utterly shattered. Hephaestion was the one person he trusted completely, the other half of his soul. Alexander's grief was epic and terrifying. He reportedly lay weeping over his friend's body for a day and night, refusing to eat or drink. He ordered a period of public mourning across entire empire and crucified the doctor who had failed to save his friend. He spent fortune on monumental funeral pyre for Hephaestion in Babylon and sent messengers to Oracle of Siwa to ask if his friend could be worshipped as god. Hephaestion's death broke something inside Alexander. Friends and observers noted he was never the same again. He plunged himself into heavy drinking and seemed to lose some of his legendary drive and focus. The loss left him isolated and deeply depressed, and likely weakened his own physical health, making him vulnerable to what was to come. In June 323 BCE in the city of Babylon, after a long bout of feasting and drinking, Alexander fell gravely ill with raging fever. For 10 days, the world's most powerful man lay dying, his body racked by pain, unable to speak. The greatest physicians of his empire were powerless to help him. What killed him, theories have swirled for centuries. Was he poisoned by his rivals, perhaps by those angered by his pro-Persian policies? Was it sudden relapse of malaria contracted in India? Or was it typhoid fever from contaminated water? The historical evidence is inconclusive. Most likely cause was virulent disease, his body weakened by years of campaigning, countless wounds, and heavy drinking. As he lay on his deathbed, his generals reportedly asked him to whom he would leave his vast empire. Alexander's final whispered words were said to be, "To the strongest." On June 11, 323 BCE, Alexander the Great died just shy of his 33rd birthday. The conqueror of the world had been defeated by foe he could not see and could not fight. Alexander's death left colossal power vacuum. He had no chosen successor and no legitimate heir. His final words, "to the strongest," were prophecy of chaos to come. His most powerful generals, the men who had ridden with him from Macedonia to India, immediately began vying for control. These men were known as the Diadochi or the successors. The 40 years following Alexander's death were a period of brutal and relentless warfare, as the Diadochi fought each other for pieces of his empire. The dream of single unified Hellenistic world died with its creator. The empire was carved up into several large kingdoms, each ruled by one of Alexander's generals and their descendants. From ashes of Alexander's empire rose the great Hellenistic kingdoms, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, founded by his general Ptolemy, the Seleucid Empire in former Persian heartland, founded by Seleucus, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. These kingdoms would continue spreading Greek language, art, and ideas throughout the East for the next 300 years. Despite political collapse of his empire, Alexander's cultural legacy was immense and enduring. His conquest shattered barriers between East and West. Greek became common language of trade and scholarship from Mediterranean to India's borders. This fusion of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian cultures created vibrant, cosmopolitan Hellenistic civilization. Alexander's military genius fundamentally changed the art of war. His masterful use of combined arms, oblique attack, and emphasis on speed, surprise, and decisive action became textbook for military commanders for millennia. Great generals like Hannibal and Julius Caesar studied his campaigns and considered him the greatest commander in history. The world Alexander created was a world of bustling new cities, great libraries like the one in Alexandria, and unprecedented intellectual exchange. This environment fostered major advances in science, mathematics, philosophy, and art. The Hellenistic age born from his conquests was a critical bridge that preserved and expanded upon classical Greek knowledge, eventually passing it to Romans and wider world. In death, Alexander became larger than life. The historical man was quickly enveloped by myth and legend. Stories of his divine birth, his taming of Bucephalus, his cutting of Gordian knot, and his journey to the ends of the earth were told and retold across ancient world. He became central figure in body of romantic literature known as Alexander Romance, translated into countless languages. He became figure in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, often portrayed as great divinely favored king or prophet. In Persian folklore, he became Iskandar, legendary national hero. From ancient coins to medieval tapestries to modern Hollywood films, his image has remained powerful and enduring symbol of ambition and conquest. Today, Alexander remains one of history's most compelling and debated figures. Was he civilizing hero who brought enlightenment to the East, or brutal megalomaniac responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths? The truth is he was both, complex and contradictory figure whose life was too vast to be contained by any single label. From prince of small kingdom to undisputed master of known world, Alexander's life was testament to power of singular, indomitable will. In 12 short years, he redrew world's map, shattered one of history's greatest empires, and initiated new era of cultural fusion. He was battlefield commander of unparalleled genius, leader who inspired godlike devotion in his men, and visionary who dreamed of unified global culture. He was also man of great contradictions, capable of both profound acts of mercy and shocking brutality. A lover of philosophy who murdered his closest friends in fits of rage and paranoia, a liberator who enslaved entire populations. His greatness was forged in violence, and his legacy is complex tapestry woven with threads of both creation and destruction. Perhaps the ultimate lesson from Alexander's life is about ambition's nature itself. His story shows us how far a single human being can go when driven by unshakable belief in their own destiny. It is a timeless, epic, and cautionary tale of what can be achieved and what can be lost in relentless pursuit of greatness. He remains and will forever remain Alexander the Great.